So our next speaker, Dr. Bernhard Riegl. He's one of our own. He's chair of the Department of Marine and Environmental Science here at NSU in the Halmos College. He's a true expert on coral reefs. He's a biologist and a geologist, which is really a great attribute for animals that make rocks. He's been active in hydrographic surveys, mapping, seafloor discrimination, optical remote sensing. He's been everywhere: Red Sea, Indian Ocean, South Pacific, Eastern Pacific, Tropical Atlantic, Caribbean. And in all of these places, he's produced numerous publications. He's had an active role in development of coastal zone management. So we welcome him, and he's really been the key instigator for this symposium today. So thank you, Dr. Riegl.
Thank you. Really, it was Terry. And we have to thank Terry for volunteering to come here. He was really the one who instigated this. So unfortunately, Steve left, but Jen and Joanna. Oh, Stephen, if in 10 minutes, if you just start standing up and making me get off this. We all have one of these, right? And we all have the internet. Truths, half-truths, confused truths, blatant lies rain down through this little machine in a more or less unbroken Twitter storm, YouTube torrent that rains over you. Who are we going to believe? Who's telling the truth? Where is the repository of truth nowadays? Well, I would claim academia is one of those places which must act as repositories of truth and who must step up to the call of speaking the truth and nothing but the truth, because really there's so little to gain in academia, and that's why our fights are so severe. We have so little to win, but we have so much to lose, which is the truth. So how do we do? How does academia and NSU do within all this? Well, the one truth is global change exists, right? The Earth is getting warmer. It's getting more acid. And it's getting dirtier. And that is really because of us, right? That's because of the multitude. The real issue, yes, is the CO2. Yes, is the heat. But the truth of the matter is it's us. And as Dr. Hughes has said, we'll need some good understanding of the social dynamics that's happening out there. And we are going to have a very close look at ourselves and how we deal with what is going on out there if we want to stop what's happening here. You heard about how the Great Barrier Reef is dying. Climate models say that in about 2100, the world will look like this area looks today. That's the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. This is a temperature graph that's the hottest in the Persian Gulf from 1870 onwards. These are abnormally hot years where we know that bleaching threshold is being reached. If you look at the spacing of these abnormally hot years, that spacing gets shorter and shorter and shorter. Each of these arrows is a coral mass mortality event in the Persian Gulf. And you see we have double events and now already 2 triple events, and we may actually be going into the 4th consecutive bleaching year this year. So this is not fantasy. This is not the famous hoax invented by the Chinese to slow down our economy. This is truth. This is in existence. This is out there. And it is heat. This is annual anomalies in the Persian Gulf region. It is heat that kills, because the warmer it gets, the more dies, and we can very clearly show that. And it's, even though corals in the warmest region of the world are very well adapted to heat, that is not enough anymore, because it just gets hotter and hotter. Summers get hotter, the rise into the hot temperatures gets hotter. Stuff just dies. It does, and it's all over. Are we as academics doing what we are supposed to do? Are we saying loud and clear to those who run our economy and those who run our politics that yes, there is matter for concern? If we go to the Web of Science and we look at citations of studies of coral, no, sorry, at studies, these are publications, citation study is actually code for publication, sorry. When we look for the term coral and climate change, we see that 2008, we started having the first global bleaching event. Yes, it looks like academia as such is doing its job. Note, please, this is only coral and climate change. This is not coral reef and climate change. This is not fish and climate change. This is just the coral animal. So is there enough information out there in the world that we can make a very clear statement about scientific consensus? Yes, there is, and academia seems to be doing its job. Now, are we here at NSU doing our job? Are we really saying what we know? Are we any good at what we do? These are the big institutions in Florida that study coral and climate change. We see the publication leader from 2009 to 19 is followed by FIU, followed by an always increasing NSU. So it looks NSU would be in the third place then in Florida. though, 77 faculty in the marine sciences, FIU, so the 50 in the marine sciences, NSU 15 in the marine sciences. So a small but very productive faculty and students, and that is a big thank you to you, the students who are here. A big part of that output comes from you. Who in Florida really produces? We said are the biggest. The state system of Florida, to which of course USF, UF, and FIU belong to, so that number is these three put together plus all the smaller institutions. They are the big players. You see NSU and FIT quite good. NSU coming here again on sort of the fourth place. We're getting there. The program is growing. The publications are growing. And interesting, we have James Cook University in here as well. This is only the co-authorships by JCU with Florida institutions. If we were measuring JCU's total output, we'd need another slide, of course. So they'd be there, of course, far leading. But you see there's a lot going on. There were 7,000 publications about coral and climate change in the period we looked at. 690 whatever came from Florida. So Florida scientists contribute 10% of the total output of that knowledge that is there. And you, ladies and gentlemen, at the school here, oops, you are, what am I doing? You are doing your share, and I thank you for that. Do people actually read the stuff that we write? These are citations of the NSU online data that we provide. These are publications by NSU folks. And citations, yes, these go up. You see here on February 15, the Halmos College came about. And the university was reorganized with research being strongly emphasized. And you see the result of this. Citations go up and up. Who reads us? Well, just about everybody in the world. Of course, we know the US cites mainly the US, Australia cites mainly Australia, France cites mainly France. That is a well-known fact. But you know, you can be proud. That is everywhere. With this, I stop, and I say thank you very much to all of you for being here. And there will be food out there. I encourage you to interact with a sandwich in hand. I thank again our speakers. I thank Stephen for a fantastic talk. I apologize for jumping up and down, but it was necessary. I thank... No, you're not allowed to eat yet. We're going to have a panel. But before that, I thank Dr. Terry Hughes again for coming to us from so far. and for making this whole thing possible. And I thank most of all of you for your interest for being here. It's fantastic having you here. And here we've got the panel. So if I can ask Terry, Jennifer, Joanna, and myself to sit here, and our dean will make sure that.
So how we're going to, oh, thank you. Yes, that's a good idea. So how we're going to do this is we're going to have our distinguished panelists, and you see them here. We'll entertain some questions from the audience or online, if there are any, and either direct your question to the panelist or to me, and I'll find a panelist who might be willing to respond. So I see one question already from Dana. So go ahead, Dana.
Bernhard, I have a question for you. So given that one of the biggest measures of accomplishment in academia is the number of publications and citations, and the fact that most resource managers don't have the time to dig through those thousands of publications to look for actionable information. Joanna does not have time to read 700 articles that have been written about corals in Florida to try and understand what the key findings are that she should be applying to keep those coral reefs around as a resource manager. How can we change that paradigm and produce more actionable information out of academia to more directly inform resource management?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's the eternally the question that eternally comes back, and there's not really a good answer. We must understand academia as it is, right? It's a knowledge-generating beast. It is not necessarily the beast that cuts that knowledge into bite-sized chunks that are easy to use for managers or for agencies. The onus, I fear, is on the agencies to cut that, whatever has been shot, that piece of game that lies in front of us, into the bite-sized chunks. Alternatively, it's an interesting social issue, right? We have to learn how to deal with ourselves as social animals, both on the large scale and on the small scale. But this is, of course, something that can be solved if money was thrown at the issue. But we mustn't confuse a knowledge generator with a solution generator, right? Academia has no management mandate, none whatsoever. And therefore, it is very difficult to ask somebody without a mandate to produce an actionable item.
I think we have another comment from a panelist here.
If I could maybe address that a little bit too, please. When the global bleaching event began to unfold, we thought long and hard about our strategies for outreach to people who need the data and also to the general public. So as Bernhard was saying, the gold standard for academics is a peer-reviewed journal, but it's not a very good way of communicating. For a start, there's at least a 12-month lag between when you have the information and when it appears in print, and you're absolutely right. People who aren't academics don't read academic papers. Our center is quite large. We have 208 PhD students. So we produce one journal article on average per day. It's a bit over 400 per year. But when the bleaching began, we devised a whole set of strategies for communicating much more quickly than journal article production. So every night when I finished that day's aerial surveys, if I had phone reception, I phoned the chief scientist of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park and told him I'd flown over 250 reefs and 180 of them were severely bleached. So they had feedback on a daily basis. We're held to a very high standard as academics in terms of validating the accuracy of our data through the peer review process, but the forces of evil, if I can use an unbiased term, can can come up with any old rubbish and put out a press release. And in Australia, as in many countries, a big chunk of the media is anti-science, anti-climate change, pro-fossil fuel. So we have a Rupert Murdoch problem in Australia, as you do, with the likes of Fox News. So we put stuff on YouTube. That video clip I showed you from the helicopter was viewed by 5 million people in 4 days. We use social media a lot. Much to my children's astonishment, I have 16,000 Twitter followers. And I say things that are politically edged in a way that our centre's Twitter feed doesn't, because we don't want to jeopardize our funding. But anyway, I'll stop talking. We have thought long and hard about using blogs and social media and press releases prior to the data being published to get the message across, because the public interest and the public need to know is huge, and I think scientists have a civic responsibility to be part of civic debates around issues like climate change.
Go ahead. Sarah.
So this is directed, I guess, to any of the panelists who want to answer, but I know either Jennifer or Joanna had mentioned it, but coral bleaching being caused by drops in temperatures in certain situations, not only in heat. I know that Dr. Feingold's research, he had seen population decline in the Galapagos after a La Nina. So I was wondering, like, how that differs from coral bleaching from population, from temperature drops differs from when there are temperature increases, if there is a difference.
Yeah, you're right, and I mentioned after my talk that you can make a coral bleach by torturing it in lots of different ways. The difference between cold water bleaching and warm water bleaching is scale. So most of the documented cold water bleachings are from Florida or the southern Great Barrier Reef. It's relatively cool waters, and because those two reefs, the Barrier Reef and the Florida Tract, are attached to continents, they have real winters compared to more oceanic reefs in the Pacific, say, or in the middle of the Indian Ocean. But cold water bleaching is very localized. I think the first paper I remember was Jim Porter in 1976, writing about a cold water bleaching event in Florida. But it's quite rare, and in the scheme of things, much smaller scale compared to the global hot water bleaching events that we're increasingly seeing.
Yes, I think so. Matt.
Yeah, along the line, the first question about the number of publications, solutions, I was looking at the lectures that Jennifer presented, one of the slides, and I saw was interesting to me. And I see many of the presentations with the pictures, charts, line graphs, all different kinds. One of the one you had was a strategic plan. On the side of one of the slides, it has 4 boxes. And I see a very basic addition and equal sign. So 2 plus 2, 2 boxes on the top, and 2 boxes on the second line. Then there's equal sign, equal to 1, equal to 1 box. What I'm trying to say here is that you had some kind of mathematical formula. 2 plus 2 equal to 1. All right? No, it's not wrong. So you try to say if you do this, if you do this, plus if you do this, you do that, you can have that, right? So we have a great panel here, scientists, academia, policy making, and everything here. So how we can fill those boxes with the scientific knowledge, the research publications from science, from nature, from all the current biology, and put into boxes, add them up, and kind of achieve the goal you set up. So that's what you're saying. You have so many publications, who's going to read it? So how are you going to do it? So this is the team you have in the panel. So with that grid formula, 2 + 2 = 1.
Perhaps the boxes weren't laid out in enough. There's a different way to lay it out. It's all four of those things coming together then equal improved management. But one of those boxes is science. And NOAA conducts an awful lot of science of its own. We fund a lot of science. We funded a lot of science in this room. So it's how do you take the kernels of that science and make it actionable? So when you figured something out, if there is an intervention strategy that can be made that you can then put into practice for threat abatement or a new novel intervention for coral restoration, how do you make it actionable and then build capacity at the local level for the coastal managers to do themselves? Because it's not the job of the federal government to come and do everywhere. I don't think you want us coming and doing everywhere. Passing on that knowledge, building capacity, building tools, building strategies is what we're really good at, and then passing that on to the people who actually have to implement it so they don't have to figure it out for themselves. We don't need to do that 7 times over in the United States. The federal government can do it in partnership with NGOs, with academics, with state level agencies, and then pass that on to coastal managers.
So collectively can become one box.
Yes.
Yeah, I think in terms of the mathematics, what you really want is a scenario where 2 + 2 = 5.
Right.
And the physiologists know all about this. So when they do experiments with more than one stressor, they typically find a synergy between them. So the sum of the two stressors is greater than either one separately. But what if we turn that on its head and look for management interventions that were synergistic? And an example might be what we can do on land to improve the fate of coral reefs. So a lot of the interventions that are currently being proposed and developed are stuff you do underwater. And I think we need a bigger picture. And in the context of achieving a slowdown in emissions and actually capturing carbon, we need to think about regrowing forests. And that could have a huge benefit, not just for coral reefs, but for all ecosystems that are affected by climate change.
Good.
Another issue on land that I'd like to bring up and get a little perspective maybe from Jennifer and Joanna about how NOAA and the state could work together to actually get an end to the sewage outfalls. You know, I mean, cleaning up the water quality. You know, you said it was the point in doing all of this restoration, and I was happy to learn that NSU is, you know, participating in or leading the water quality monitoring aspect. But there's a piece missing, so they're monitoring. That'll be good data. That NOAA is going to like promote some kind of improved water quality. The state is doing it, but there's a lack of regulation. No one is the actual regulator that's saying this is where it ends has not come to fruition after a decade when we said at that Coral Reef Symposium right here in Fort Lauderdale in 2008 that it was going to end, and it still hasn't ended.
So are you speaking specifically about the offshore outfalls? Or are you speaking about the wastewater infrastructure?
In general,
okay.
Yeah, because even if it's not an outfall, if it's deep well injection or whatever we're doing with our, you know, sewage and sanitation is just not of the highest quality, except for the Keys where we've got it going now.
I absolutely agree. In fact, there is legislation for the offshore outfalls. That's why I wanted to clarify what you meant, because the legislation says that they need to be shut down except for emergency uses by 2025, I believe. And so we are nearing that window of where the municipalities need to have all of those things in place. Yes, there's some pushback. It costs a lot of money. We're talking about billions of dollars, and that's one of the struggles that we have in terms of the infrastructure itself. Even in Miami-Dade County, where you have 3 million people living in a very dense population, they're already under a consent order that mandates them to upgrade their wastewater infrastructure because of the lack of maintenance that they've had over the years. But getting the money prioritized in and finding a big enough, I mean, we really are talking, when we're talking about this dense urban area, billions of dollars. But it's something actually that we have been working on and bringing the coral voice to, because we know how important it is. And again, with our commissioner and the regional planning councils of South Florida, have been raising that awareness at various different levels, from from ultimately getting off of septic systems to upgrading the sewer infrastructure itself, which is in many cases in this area already aging past the 50-year time horizon, to shutting down those outfalls and addressing biosolids, which if you don't know about biosolids, you should probably educate yourself on those. It is very much the focus of this current administration to work on reducing those, especially the phosphorus and nitrogen associated with those things, but also the pharmaceuticals and endocrine disruptors and all of the other stuff that goes with that. That is not just bad for our corals, but it's bad for our community and all the other coastal ecosystems. So that definitely is a very high priority right now for us.
Steve?
I just want to reinforce the importance of communication to the public of these things. We're all interested in them, and we've all heard about it. But in the United States, there's an interesting phenomena that's gone on that I've watched in my 50 years of being a scientist, which is that really good science public relations is in the toilet. It really has been since Carl Sagan was well known for talking about billions and billions of years. And we haven't had anybody like that in a long time. And every time, and Carl paid a price for that. I mean, like I was introduced as being a member of the National Academy. He was denied membership in the National Academy because he was so popular. And his colleagues in the United States thumbs down to him, all right? That's a bad thing for scientists to be known for, but they did it, okay? More recently, there was a Pulitzer Prize winner from UCLA named Jared Diamond who wrote a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel. It was a great book. Most of you read it. PBS made a TV special about it called Guns, Germs, and Steel. And I remember reading a review in the Washington Post, and it was after PBS wanted to get a narrator who was colorful and handsome and did a good job. Jared said, no, if you're going to do my book, I'm going to be the narrator. So he did. The reviewer in the Washington Post said, well, I kind of watched Jared Diamond walking us through this, and of course I had read his book. But the truth is, he's kind of dry, and he didn't really present it very well. So if you really want to get the story, read the book. What I'm trying to say is that some people are better than others at projecting and communication and putting it out there. And when you see that, don't pull them down. Put them up there, because we need more of them, particularly in this country.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to underline that. Sorry, just to jump in. I mean, science communication and that interface between the application of science and the doing of science, that is a work channel all by itself. And that's just something we have to realize, right? That needs working on.
I think it's part of Terry's social science initiative.
Exactly.
Question there.
So kind of on the same track we're on, I'm sure most of the people saw the video of the turtle with the straw in his nose and kind of how that happened. And I mean, it was a cool thought, get rid of all the straws, but everything's very multifaceted in this world. And how can one video like that have such a big reaction where bleached corals, especially with what Terry shows us, there is so much going on underwater. How do we convey that to the people that care? Which is, I mean, everyday people want to care. But when you point a finger and say, this is your fault, they immediately back up. They're like, oh, I'm not taking the heat for this. How do we make it okay to say, we have this problem, how do we fix it? What's the best way to make these, videos, Blue Planet, Chasing Coral? How do we make this the front line of the news every single day? Not some political thing that everybody wants to, oh, well, we'll focus on that instead.
Who would like to take that response?
I'll just say, I think that's a brilliant question. And I think things like the turtle with the straw stuck in its nostril or sunscreens, the everyday citizen can see, I can do something about that. I can stop using straws. I can use mineral-based sunscreens. I cannot use these chemical-based things and feel like they're making a difference. But when the problem is presented as global warming and you see multiple nations increasing their greenhouse gas emissions here in the United States, you know we're not doing anything about it at an administrative level. I think actually technology is figuring out it's cheaper to go cleaner. We're going to ultimately probably solve that problem on our own, absent political will in this country. But that problem is so intractable. I don't know how you appeal to people. I mean, we constantly talk about reducing your greenhouse or your carbon footprint, and I don't know how many people feel like the small things that they're doing are making huge differences. So I think that's a phenomenal question. It's something that we struggle with all the time in NOAA, and we're training ourselves on how to talk in economics so that we can get the money to solve the problem. And when you're talking about the amount of money that Australia put into addressing your global bleaching crisis, that the United States puts no money into this in terms of what GDP gets developed off of coral reefs. It's horrifying.
Joanna.
I'm going to speak a little bit. I think about this all the time because, and it's actually the guys that that did Chasing Coral, the ad guy from that movie, has gone on to think about it too and do some of the social surveys to try to figure out. And what he came and presented at Reef Futures on was that coral reefs and all of the things that we've talked about today that are facing them are so overwhelming that people get sad and kind of just get that paralysis of I can't even. And he said that the way we message to them currently is very logical. It's like, you should do this there because of this. And it's that analytical message that is not getting across. We actually have to flip the messaging on its side and go for the emotional messaging, which is very much not something that the agencies like to do because we like to stick to the science and the facts. But the reality is that straw in that turtle's nose got everybody because you felt it, you felt that being and that pain and that emotion. And yes, there was a tangible thing, and thankfully that was a gateway conversation. But it's about getting to the emotional side of it that we really like to avoid. And so there is a campaign, and it's something that we're still working out some of the issues with this campaign, but this guy from Chasing Coral has created the Glowing Gone campaign, which ultimately is taking these, some of the corals in the world fluoresce crazy colors when they bleach. And he's ultimately building a whole campaign and using those colors in a color palette spectrum and branding using like Adobe Illustrator and getting these really big private partnerships to say, can we use this color palette in all of our advertising in like crazy places and raise awareness of the issue by making it on NFL jerseys or whatever, getting it really well known, and it's ultimately, I think their campaign name is, it's Glowing, Glowing, Gone, but the tagline is, don't let us glow. And it's that emotional reaction of, it's their like cry to not let us go because they're bleaching. Now, that being said, the funding, like where most people are like, throw my money at that, but where do you send that money? Some of those things haven't been worked out, and so we're still we're not quite pushing that campaign quite yet, but they've got the right concept, and I do support that kind of work.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
I'm a bit more skeptical about what I see as passing the buck from the responsibilities of governments to individuals. And of course it's important that individuals are aware of all of these environmental problems, but there's a risk that trivial issues will be addressed by individuals. They feel like they're doing the right thing for the environment, but the elephant in the room is still global warming. And global warming, we now have a framework for dealing with, the Paris Agreement. And I think governments play, and will continue to play, the major role in transitioning to decarbonize economies, and it shouldn't be passed on to individuals. So in Australia, there are now efforts to ban plastic straws. I've probably had 5,000 dives on the Great Barrier Reef. I've never seen one plastic straw. and bans on sunscreen. Again, there's no field evidence that any coral has been killed by sunscreen on a coral reef. So I see a downside in making it the responsibility of individuals to save these major problems, because governments have to play the lead role. And I think the most important thing citizens can do to save the world's coral reefs is vote. Vote for parties and governments that will address the root causes of the problem, instead of saying it's not our responsibility, it's citizens' responsibilities.
Okay, we're getting close to the end, but I'll take a couple more questions. Paul.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, Jennifer, I was intrigued by the fact that NOAA's putting together an X Prize to scale this up. And on the footsteps of what Terry just said, we have waterway cleanups down here, and you get hundreds, if not thousands, of people mobilized to do something. The problem is that I see it, and maybe you can correct me, in terms of the current problem with the reefs, there's nothing that I can think of other than broad policies and global warming. There's nothing that you can mobilize the local population with and say, let's go out and solve this. There's not a solution to the disease or to the bleaching yet. And until you come up with something, you know, I think, as Terry said, it's not an individual matter.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear that prize is about trying to solve the engineering problem of scalability. So if and when water quality gets back to where it needs to be and you find the resilient corals that are going to make it, you then can put those things out in enough tissue, enough biomass that it'll make a difference at an ecosystem level. So it's solving a problem in parallel while all these other things need to happen. This isn't any more a magic bullet than anything else. So, and the prize is a few years off. It's literally trying to get past the bottleneck of not being able to put enough corals out fast enough on a big enough scale.
Terry, did you want to comment on that? Because scalability is something you've looked into, and it seems to me it's a significant issue.
Yeah, there's a couple of recent studies and some unpublished work I'm aware of where people have looked at coral gardening in particular. Coral gardening's been going on now for about 50 years. There was a big surge in Southeast Asia after the Asian tsunami, which was 2002, I think. And there's been a big growth in the Caribbean, especially when the 2 Acropora species were listed as endangered, because that requires a restoration plan. And I think the costing for that in U.S. territorial waters was $250 million, and the time frame, wait for it, was 400 years. So that, I think, indicates the challenge. If you look at the available information on all of the coral gardening that's been done to date, I've seen a study with a sample size of 250. The average area restored so far is 110 square meters. Which is obviously pretty small. And if you extrapolate that up to a hectare, the cost on average is between $1 and $4 million a hectare. And that's usually to restore 1 or 2 species that are generally chosen because they're fast growing. So a couple of issues. Before any restoration, you made this point, is attempted, you need to deal with the drivers. What caused the degradation in the first place? Otherwise, you're wasting your time, because history will repeat itself. The polluted river will flood again, bleaching will reoccur, and so on. So you have to deal with the cause. The plant people who do terrestrial restoration are 30 years ahead of the coral reef community. And the International Society for Ecological Restoration have a kind of a manifesto with the title, How to Do Restoration. And number 1 is deal with the driver. Number 2 is know why you're doing it, so have a clear objective. And often with coral restoration, the objective is not stated, or if it is, it doesn't actually match what they're doing. So it might be a very broad objective, like to rebuild the resilience of the barrier reef, or to restore biodiversity, of a damaged reef, but they're growing one species of coral. So they're not going to reach that objective. Number 3 is have a control. So in order to assess the cost effectiveness of outplanting corals, you need to have an adjoining control location where you measure natural regeneration and see if there's any difference. Nobody does that. I've only found a handful of studies that do it. If you go online, you can pay $50 to sponsor a coral fragment, and you'll get a certificate for being a superhero. You'll get a picture of the coral in the nursery and another picture when it's outplanted. What you don't get is a third picture 5 years later that says the coral actually survived after it was glued onto the reef. So monitoring is often inadequate or entirely missing in many restoration projects. People often think of the outplanting as the conclusion of the restoration, right? And it's really only the beginning. So there's a lot of work to do, I think, to improve the rigor of these projects, and the cost is very substantial. So yes, you can restore with a few $1 million some of the biodiversity of an area the size of a hectare, but for restoring a damaged ecosystem, we're talking tens of billions of dollars with our current technology. So someone could get very rich and have a breakthrough so that it's feasible at square kilometer scales, but that hasn't happened yet.
Well, let's conclude with the last words from our distinguished panelists, and then we can have a break and go out and get a drink. So, Dr. Riegl, would you have a summary?
Words of wisdom. Well, thank you everyone for being here. The glass is half full, I would say, and our challenges are cut.
How do I even follow that? One of my favorite quotes is, you can't save the world with sadness, you can only save it with hope. And it is a really tough time to be in the environmental industry in general. And so you have to find your hope and stay with it, because there are many, many challenges out there. But if you let the sadness overtake you, we will not win this together. And so find your hope and keep at it, because we need every single person on board here.
I guess I'd just echo what Joanna said. This isn't something that we can fail at. We fail at this, we fail at lots of different things, and so with, I think, enough smart people and more awareness, especially a whole lot more awareness, we should be able to solve this problem.
Terry, last word?
Well, of course, it's a political problem as much as a science problem. So I'll just conclude by saying something for the students in the room. And that is, I would argue there's never been a greater need for coral reef research. And that's in part because everything we thought we knew about coral reefs is wrong. They're changing so rapidly. The species composition is shifting incredibly quickly. The way in which reefs are regenerating has been altered. The connectivity, the networks of larval dispersal are new and different. We have to relearn how coral reefs in the Anthropocene work, because it's transitioning at an incredibly rapid phase. So students in the audience, don't lose heart that your favorite ecosystem is changing hugely. There's actually a huge research challenge that you will need to address.
Outstanding. Thank you, panelists, for this very informative session. And now we have some refreshments outside and a chance to talk to our panelists and other people and learn some more. So thank you again. Thank you so much. Great final.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great.